Yorkshire Ripper, featuring Peter Sutcliffe. Full name, Peter William Sutcliffe. Crimes and sprees. Peter Sutcliffe is known as the Yorkshire Ripper due to the fact he was known to murder 13 females, attempted 7 as well, in the Yorkshire County area in England, UK, specifically the northern area in the English country. These murder spree had lasted from October of 1975 to November of 1980. For 5 terrifying years for the residents in Yorkshire County. In a lot of cases, Peter would target sex workers or vulnerable females. He would attack them, kidnap them when he spots them vulnerable in a dark street night of Yorkshire. It was noted he would attack his victims with a hammer, a large one, as he attacked from behind with a sudden move. Despite the target being a female and sex workers, there were varieties of females such as college students, a clerk, and civil servant. It was noted he had severe connection with British serial killer Jack the Ripper. In some of the cases he was actually dubbed as the Jack the Ripper 2, due to the similarities and connections between the two serial killers. Investigation. The police investigation of the case of Peter Sutcliffe was Britain's largest, overstretched, and flawed manhunts. It was noted for Britain's histories of serial killers. In fact, it was noted there were 2.5 million police officers in the search for just one man, which was Peter Sutcliffe. Likely they did not want to make or create the same mistake when they did to the case of Jack the Ripper, where he would escape from the hands of the police and never be seen again. There were many misleads, specifically over 250,000 false names and leads. There were massive failures within the case of Peter Sutcliffe. In fact, there were severe survivors who volunteered to help for the search of Peter Sutcliffe, but since they met the killer himself, however, the police would dismiss them and kick them out of the police station. In a way, the police were in a desperate situation and condition on finding the serial killer. There were a huge amount of profiles created for the case of Sutcliffe, most of them were false. One day on 1979, a recording tape had delivered to the police station. In that recording, the person who talked claimed he was the Jack the Ripper. However, the police would discover the accent, specifically a Wearside accent, native to Sunderland, Northeast England. Investigation Part 2. Ironically, Peter Sutcliffe himself was interviewed several times. However, the police would dismiss him as being the serial killer due to the fact that in every physical interview he would make with the police, he would fake and use another accent that did not match the recordings that was sent before by the apparent Jack the Ripper. Anyways, in the office of where the investigation took place, it was reported loads of paper were printed just for the case of Sutcliffe. Due to the overwhelming amount of papers and reportedly printed in the facility, the floorboard broke down because they couldn't hold the huge and large amounts of paper that printed basically every day. Therefore, the facility was reinforced in a way required to rebuild just to hold the weight of the amount of papers for the case of Sutcliffe. There were many leads, available evidences, however all of them would be dismissed by the police, leading to them creating a rabbit hole under them, and making it difficult to dig out. In other words, difficult to catch the Yorkshire Ripper. On one lucky day, on January 2, 1981, two patrol officers had discovered Peter Sutcliffe speed driving and a mislead on his license plate. Specifically, he would fake and create a false identity. When in custody, Peter Sutcliffe would confess about the murders so casually. In addition, he would even help the police gather evidence for his murders spree. Also, he was laughing as he guided the police to the evidence or the dump sites. Trial and court proceedings. The trial and court proceedings for the case of Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe will take place in the Old Bailey Court, a well-known British criminal court. Similar to the case in the US of Herbert Millward and Donald Henry Gaskins, the court was about whether if Peter was mad or bad. In other words, if he was legally sane or insane without the British slangs. As he would confess in order to show about himself committing the murders, in other words, showing the evidences that he committed the crimes, Peter Sutcliffe in court would plead not guilty for the murder, or let alone first-degree murder. However, he would instead plead guilty for manslaughter on the grounds of the diminished responsibility. Ironically, the court, along with the prosecutors, had accepted his deal, surprisingly, leading to the plan of Peter Sutcliffe spending his time not in a standard prison such as HMP Wakefield. However, he would spend his lifetime in a psychiatric hospital with maximum security to prevent fugitives such as Peter Sutcliffe from escaping. There was reportedly an argument between Peter Sutcliffe and the Judge Justice Leslie Bornham. During the court, Peter spoke in such a gentle and calm facade without any remorse. In other words, a less monstrous appearance the public would imagine for a serial killer with his description. Trial and Court Proceedings Part 2. During his testimonies before the court declared his official sentence, the defense of Peter Sutcliffe would use his apparent medical records along with his apparent claims on hearing the voice of God. In other words, a form of delusion in medical term. Peter Sutcliffe would specifically say he heard God telling him to kill the victims. It was noted Peter Sutcliffe had first claimed he apparently heard the voice and order from God when he was 20 years old. At first, the psychiatrist had declared him to have schizoid personality, in other words, schizophrenia. However, it was later discovered Peter Sutcliffe was lying, so he would avoid a harsher punishment. Ultimately, on May 22, 1981, the jury had found Peter Sutcliffe to be guilty on all confirmed 13 counts of murders and 7 counts of attempted murder. The jury had also agreed that Peter Sutcliffe was a calculating serial killer who knew between what was right and wrong, rather than a powerfully insane serial killer. Specifically, Judge Justice Leslie Bornham would sentence Peter Sutcliffe to 20 concurrent life terms with recommendations to serve at least 30 years. Later on, though, the order was upgraded into a whole life sentence, meaning he would never be released even if over 10 decades hypothetically would pass, which is highly unlikely because Peter Sutcliffe would not likely have survived 10 decades. Childhood. It was noted the childhood of Peter Sutcliffe involved a working-class household. However, it was deeply dysfunctional household as well, along with severe abuse, social isolation, and intense school bullying. Peter Sutcliffe was the eldest of 6 children, raised in a household located in Shipley, West Yorkshire, Yorkshire County, a town in Bingley. Peter Sutcliffe was born from his father, John Sutcliffe, and his mother, Kathleen Sutcliffe. John, the father of Peter Sutcliffe, was reportedly heavily abusive towards both his mother and the children, including Peter Sutcliffe, in both physically, mentally, and emotional ways. Even when Peter was still in his mother's stomach, his father, John, would beat his mother violently, causing Peter Sutcliffe as a baby to be hospitalized for 2 weeks at least. The physical abuse from Peter's father involved punching, whipping with a leather belt, and sometimes smashing his beer glass violently on the head, specifically on Peter Sutcliffe. The father of Sutcliffe had suspected one day of Kathleen, the mother of Peter, cheating on him. leading to John sexually assaulting Kathleen right in front of the eyes of the children, including Peter. Childhood, Part 2. Despite the traumatic abuse towards his mother that his father caused, due to the hate towards his father, John, Peter would cling on his mother on her side specifically. In other words, Peter would grow increasingly and intensely attached to his mother. The father of Peter would become frustrated and pissed, leading to a taunting towards Peter, specifically calling him a mama's boy. Academic and school-wise, Peter had reportedly hated sports and disliked any physical activities, leading to him not being as active as much. In one of the sources, it mentioned Peter Sutcliffe would trap himself inside the bathroom to avoid any chaos, which led to another layer of taunt and a horrible joke for his father to taunt Peter Sutcliffe with. Peter was reportedly a small boy, who also seemed to have a gentle and vulnerable demeanor, leading to his peers around bullying and badly teasing him. Due to the non-stop bullying, Peter Sutcliffe would skip school and hide at his home, also keeping it a secret from his parents. At age 15, Peter would drop out of school with 0 qualifications. Overall, the childhood of Peter Sutcliffe was highly difficult for him and deeply unstructured, both home life and school life wise. Personal life, potentially affecting their crimes and acts. Ironically, a stark contrast from his childhood, the personal life of Peter Sutcliffe was structured and a functional personal life. Peter would meet a female named Sonia Zerma in a pub in 1967 at age 21. And 7 years later, after meeting and the dates with his newly found girlfriend, he would marry in a courtship, specifically on August 10, 1974. Despite the seemingly good affair, behind the doors, Peter had suffered abuse from his wife, leading to him often having to physically stop her from the abuse. She was also diagnosed with a schizoid personality, along with other mental conditions. Even if the abuse had occurred, the marriage ironically still had lasted. In addition, Sonia began to focus on her career, rather than beating Peter Sutcliffe all the time. She was oblivious to the fact that her husband, Peter Sutcliffe, was a serial killer, let alone the Yorkshire Ripper. A source mentioned that his wife would wash his clothes, even if it was bloodstained, and still wouldn't notice the serial killer secret of the Yorkshire Ripper. Neighbors around described Peter Sutcliffe as a gentleman, an ordinary man. Also, he was known to be a quiet man who wasn't talkative. Overall, the personal life of Peter Sutcliffe was seemingly structured until his conviction and after his abusive childhood. Pivotal events. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on the 2nd of June, 1946 in Shipley, West Yorkshire, England. On 1961, aged 15, Peter Sutcliffe would drop out of school. On 1964, at age 17, Peter Sutcliffe qualified on becoming a gravedigger as his job. It was reported from Peter Sutcliffe on 1966 he heard a voice from God to kill. On 1967, Peter Sutcliffe met his wife, Sonia Zerma. On 1974, Peter and Sonia would marry and become husband and wife. On September of 1969, at age 23, Peter would commit his first assault. On October of 1975, Peter had committed his first murder, murdering Wilma McCann. On January 2nd, 1981, at age 34, Peter Sutcliffe was arrested officially. On May 22, 1981, Peter Sutcliffe was sentenced for 13 murders in the Old Bailey Court. Quotes from Peter William Sutcliffe. I went back to school and kicked 7 shades of the shit out of that bully that was bullying me. I had enough of it, and I went back to school as anybody else could be. I was like a bull in a Chinese shop. It was my quest and mission from God to kill those girls. Of course I was, that was the whole point. Hello, the sweetie, it's Peter here. How are you, love? Yeah, not bad, haha. I was suffering from schizophrenia. I said thanks to God, because you're guiding everything. He came to me in my cell and asked if I could show him the quality treats I have got ready for Christmas. Forensic inferences. The life of Peter Sutcliffe, was seemingly carrying a sense of sexual arousal towards females. It wasn't necessarily a form of hate, it was more of a curiosity mindset that went too far. It was noted he would do surgical activities with the victims once they were deceased. Throughout his life, he was abused, even in occasional times as an adult. The amount of damage in his brain is uncertain, however, it is likely there were at least some sort of permanent damage from the abuse. Whether if it was father or his wife, it's unknown. Likely and specifically from the abuses from his father committing to him when Peter Sutcliffe was a child is highly likely. Especially when his mother was humiliated when he was a child from his father, he felt a sense of arousal, a sexual one, towards females. An add-on of motivation was likely put, not out of hate, but the fuel had aroused him likely, when his wife would have outbursts. While it's not proven, likely a combination of factors related to encounter with females was put in his mind or head. In addition, he likely thought, when getting bullied, while knowing what was right and wrong, the bullying may have fueled his aggression when attacking the victims, not out of hate, but out of the experience he adjusted to aside from the abuse from his father committed to him when he was a child. Aside from desires, his obsession with sex workers likely kicked in during the murders, a sense of obsessiveness carved in his head. Overall, the crimes of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, was likely caused by a combination of factors, including his father's abuse, sexual desire towards females, the possible permanent damages, and the adjustment into treatment and abuse towards female that had occurred. Legacy and impact. The case of the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter William Sutcliffe, is on one of Britain's most largest cases in British history. From the case of Peter, it created the Holmes computer network, a computer that can handle tons of data, a contrast to the floorboards that tragically broke down. The Britain began to change their ways on treating female victims, particularly sex workers. The media showed backlash against the Northern England police because of the neglect towards the surviving female victims. Public spaces for females began to be created during the night to avoid being murdered by killers such as Peter Sutcliffe. A dark weight within the British female community had been left based on the case of Peter Sutcliffe.